sense of what we're doing, what we've done on several issues, and where perhaps the governor would like to go. So thank you for being willing to take time to talk to us. This last session, one of the key issues was property tax reform. And we were able to get, after several failed attempts over the years, we were able to get something through. Can you give us just kind of a rundown of what passed the legislature?
There were two very significant property tax bills that passed in the previous session. The first was House Bill 3. House Bill 3 was the comprehensive school finance reform package. Needless to say, property taxes being such an integral component to school finance, that the education reform package had a major component dealing with property taxation. That focused specifically on the M&O taxes that are levied to provide funding for schools. Separately, there was Senate Bill 2, which addressed city-county taxation. Both those bills ran on somewhat parallel tracks, both of which were passed at the end of session.
Now, the issue on the city-county, what you essentially did there was the state said to cities and counties, I guess, that you cannot raise taxes above a certain level and without going back to the public for a vote. So what did we have several cities that were sort of bumping up tax rates significantly? What was happening there to cause that approach?
Over the course of at least 2 decades in Texas, perhaps more than that, city-county levies had grown extraordinarily high. The fundamental problem with property taxation is that people are punished, and by people I mean both businesses and homeowners, are punished when there are good economic conditions, because the property tax itself is so linked to economic growth, and with it then the rise of property values, that it was inevitable that year over year over year, businesses and homeowners would pay more and more in terms of property taxation due to the strength of the Texas economy. One of the chief problems with the system as it pre-existed this last legislative session was that we had an 8% rollback rate, which is effectively a municipality could raise its property taxes up to 8% a year without having to go to the voters for approval. Well, needless to say, 8% year-over-year growth is extraordinary. Most of us wish we could have investments that yielded 8% growth.
Or raises.
Or pay raises, simply put, exactly. And so consequently, what was happening at the city-county level was that particularly in your fast growth areas, the city officials would raise taxes getting close to that 8% threshold, which brought in an extraordinary amount of money. And as a consequence of the previous system, they wouldn't have to go to voters for approval. So you had exorbitant increases in taxation without voter input on those increases.
And what the legislation did was limit that to, I think, was it 3%?
3.5%.
3.5%. But now I have seen stories, and IPI has published something on this, that several of the cities are saying, well, if this is going to go into effect at the beginning of next year, I believe, let's hurry up and pass some tax increases now as a way to sort of get past this. We'll bump up the taxes now so we don't we sort of pad our pockets now, and then we don't have to then we'll live up with more constrained things in the future. But let's go ahead and jump the gun now.
That's a fair representation. We've seen news reports from around the state with reflecting that some municipalities were going to go ahead and do so. It shows a fundamental disrespect for their taxpayers and their voters in their communities that they would rush to do so. But it's not really all that surprising, because for many, many sessions, consecutive sessions, the same cities and counties would frequently, or would not frequently, would repetitively oppose any sort of meaningful property tax reform, and they did the same thing in this legislative session. So that's not the surprise. The surprise at this point is that given the legislative change, it seems much more brazen than it had been in the past.
Yeah. In the last couple of minutes we have, can you give the listeners a little bit of a background? There are, I think, 6 other states that don't have a state income tax. They go off sales taxes primarily and property taxes. But it has, I don't recall, I'm not aware that other states have had the struggle that we have had trying to address the tax issue, what they call the Robin Hood and so forth. What is it about Texas that has made this such an issue?
Well, actually, if I may, I would suggest to you that many other states have had to grapple with this, even states that have income taxes and property taxes, New Jersey being a prime example. There has been school finance litigation all around the country, but making the same fundamental claim that there's an inequity that derives from property taxation that has in multiple states around the country been mostly resolved by the courts. And that's been true in Texas for at least 30 years since the Edgewood cases had initially been heard and decided upon by the Texas Supreme Court. So other states have grappled with the same thing, but I would say that based on my knowledge, which I'll admit is incomplete in terms of a national view, Texas was finally probably the largest state that dealt with it in a fundamental fashion in the way that was passed last session.
On the phone with us is John Colyandro. He is the policy director for Texas Governor Greg Abbott. He's been working in that position for a few years now, advising the governor on policy issues that we're facing in the state of Texas. When we come back, we're going to take up a couple of other things like workforce development and occupational licensing. So we've got a number of issues to cover with John, and we want to get his insight as to what's happening, what has happened, and where we think we might be going in the next legislative session. So stay with us, and we will be back in just a minute.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, if you think about it, your life is the culmination of lots and lots of decisions. Jim Clifton, CEO of Gallup, argues that people make 10,000 to 20,000 small decisions every day. If you multiply this by the U.S. population, you end up with 1 quadrillion decisions. This is one of the points Jeff Myers makes in his book, Understanding the Culture. The legacy you leave is the sum of all your decisions. Many are inconsequential. Others determine the future direction of your life. Some don't seem that important at the time, but they turn out to be some of the most significant decisions you ever made. So how should we make decisions? First, we should consult the Bible. We know that God's will can be found in the Bible since it is full of specific commands and principles. Second, we should pray. We can discern God's will through prayer. Philippians 4:6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God." Third, consult your conscience. If your conscience troubles you, then there is reason that you should stop and not proceed. Acts 24:16 says, Christians should strive to have a good conscience before God and man. By the way, a clear conscience isn't always a justification for proceeding. The Bible teaches the heart is deceitful above all things. We can easily deceive ourselves into sin. Finally, seek counsel. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Wisdom comes from many counselors. Share your decision with other godly men and women. Their collective response will often provide God's direction in a matter. As Christians, we should strive to make wise and godly decisions about our life. How we make decisions will affect the rest of our life and leave a legacy of faith for others to follow. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And on the phone with me, John Colyandro, who is a senior advisor and policy director for Texas Governor Greg Abbott. John, before we jump off taxes, let's ask one more. Are we done with tax reform, or is there more to do?
Absolutely not. There is so much more to do on property taxation, particularly, and for two fundamental reasons. The first is property taxation in and of itself is pernicious. The nature of the system, even with these fundamental reforms that were passed this session, the system is such that it is designed to throw off cash in a strong economic environment. And from a taxpayer standpoint, that is not good. You want to maintain that strong economic situation without having to be penalized year after year with the year over year with the tax penalty through property taxation. The other issue with it is it's fundamentally a property rights issue. We have created a tax system that is linked to, for most of us, the one significant investment that we would have in our lifetime, and that's our homestead residence. And to build a system of taxation that imposes such a heavy burden on our primary investment, which is our home, is a system that, in my mind, is fundamentally unjust. So even with the reforms that we've had, there's so much more that we need to do as a state to continue to lessen the burden of property taxation.
Good. Let's change directions and ask this question. One of the key things that have been driving conservatives and libertarians in states around the country is the issue of occupational licensing, because so many states over time end up creating so many restrictions, barriers to entry for people being able to go and do various things. In some cases, fairly benign things, but they have to get training, they have to get a license, they have to do something to allow them to do these things, and that creates a shortage. It also stops a lot of lower income people and people wanting to sort of start a business who may not have an education and go out and get a major job. It keeps them from being able to start something. What does the governor plan to do about that?
Well, the governor, since he actually was running for governor, has made occupational licensing reform a priority, and through 3 legislative sessions has promoted and ultimately signed a number of occupational licensing reforms. Even administratively, he's taken a very strong approach to licensing. Very recently, the governor sent a letter to those state agencies that issue occupational licenses, asking them to look at administrative reforms to lessen the burden on workers attempting to get into the workplace. It is a extraordinarily important issue for a couple reasons, one of which is the paramount one, and that is, if we believe, and I know you and I, Merrill, share this belief, as do millions of other people, that work is not only essential to life, but that it is a virtuous component in our lives. Government-imposed barriers to work must be dismantled. And you pointed out in your introductory remarks how it impacts low-income individuals. Let me give you a very concrete example of what that impact is. At the governor's direction, we were taking a look at occupational licensing. And one of the things that in that debate that bears noting is that so many of the licensed occupations are for those occupations that typically an average income would be middle to lower income. And it begs the question of how many people who are issued a state license to the Department of Licensing and Regulation are also on public assistance. And after some months of working with 2 state agencies, the answer came back that there were approximately 80,000 Texans.
Really?
Who hold an occupational license, who also are on public assistance. So there's a larger universe of individuals who might be eligible, but for various reasons they decline to enroll in those programs. But there are about 80,000 people who have a license who are also on public assistance. So the point of that is this. The barriers that the state has erected over the course of many decades makes it extraordinarily difficult in terms of time and fees and exams to enter the workplace. And that's reprehensible and contrary to our fundamental beliefs about the essence and importance of work.
Well, I've got to ask you this question because I struggle with this myself, because there have been times, and I've been to conferences where some groups would say we need to get rid of all licensing, including, say, for instance, for medical doctors, so that anybody could practice medicine in the state who wanted to. And I sort of push back on that a little bit. That seems a little bit strong to me. But how do you balance that issue of we're going to make sure that we allow people to, we reduce barriers to entry to occupations, while at the same time making sure that there's some protection out there for the public?
Well, let's start from a practical perspective, and I'll go to perhaps a more philosophical perspective. On a practical level, when I talked about this in front of various audiences, I asked this question of the women in the room. At what age did you learn to braid hair? And the answers range, but typically you'd say 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. In order to practice hair braiding in the state of Texas heretofore, you had to have a state issued license. Most of the state-issued licenses, if not all of them, are the premise of them is to protect public health, safety, and welfare. And when you take as your starting point hair braiding, you work through your way through all the other occupational licenses, you can look at them and on their face answer the question, does it impact public health, safety, or welfare? And the answer is absolutely not. So the justification for these, or the philosophical justification, is you're protecting the public, but the reality is you're merely erecting barriers to entry for people who all they want to do is earn a living. So I tend to agree with you that there are certain occupations, and unquestionably, in my mind, there ought to be licenses, but for the vast majority of them, there either ought not to be a license, or the state-imposed requirements in terms of class time, examinations, and fees ought to be significantly reduced.
This brings us to this next question of workforce development, because we have a large population in the state. A lot of them do not have education. We have a lot of people who've migrated here from other states. Some have migrated from other countries. What's the state doing about a workforce development? Is there a plan there, or do you have some kind of goal you're trying to reach?
Well, I think the primary thing is to step back and look at where we are with our workforce, and there are two fundamental issues. The one just a data point. The other is an observation. And the data point is this. When you look at the Texas economy, the common refrain is we're doing exceptionally well. Look how low unemployment is. In some communities in the state, it's historically low. I believe Austin is, as an example, is at an historically low unemployment rate. But across the state, the economic news is generally good. But what is of concern is that the workforce participation rate remains low, and low in the context of the last recession. Now, there are lots of reasons, some of which are very good, why people don't participate in the workforce. But you have to ask the question about the qualifications of the individuals who might want to work but don't. And you have to ask the question of what barriers there might be, like occupational licensing, for people to participate in the workforce. So without suggesting that there's a plan per se, there are obvious policies that ought to be pursued to improve the workforce picture in the state, starting with occupational licensing reform. But there are other things, most notably educational reform. When you look at over the course of years, the performance of students on college entrance exams, notably SAT and ACT, graduates from Texas public high schools, even though they've been conferred a diploma, which ostensibly means that that individual is career, college, and military ready.
John, let me get you to hold that there, because we're coming up to a break, and then we'll come back after the break and pick up on that. My guest is John Colyandro, Senior Advisor and Policy Director for Governor Greg Abbott. When we come back, we'll finish up with that thought, and we'll ask about the homeless problem in Texas. Stay with us.
Point of View is committed to spreading the truth, oftentimes a truth that those in political power don't like getting heard. But the only way it can be heard is if our team stands strong together, if you do what you can to support the Point of View Truth Team. It's having an impact, as we heard recently from U.S. Representative Louis Gohmert.
Everywhere I go, I hear people that you have influenced, that Point of View has affected. You have made such a difference, and you rely on people to contribute, and if they don't contribute, then that truth does not get heard.
Help Point of View make a difference. Pray and consider what level is right for you. $30, $65, $100 a month, or even more. Please do what you can. 1-800-347-5151, or visit online, pointofview.net. Look near the top right for the link that says Become a Monthly Partner. Join the Truth Team, 800-347-5151, and pointofview.net. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
And we're back with John Colyandro, Senior Advisor and Policy Director for Texas Governor Greg Abbott. John, when we broke for the last break, you were talking about the workforce development, and so go ahead and finish that thought now.
Well, I mentioned first and foremost that the occupational licensing is an impediment to workforce participation. The point that we broke on was about performance of students coming out of Texas public high schools. And that problem is manifest with this, and that is when you look at passing scores in SAT and ACT of Texas public high school graduates, among all students who choose to take that exam, and let's bear in mind, this is a student who believes that they want to and are prepared to go to college. This is not a mandatory exam for anybody. So of those students who decide to take one of those two exams, only approximately 18 to 20% of them get a passing grade.
Mm.
So when you think about the massive implications for that for the Texas workforce, it is ample justification alone for the educational reforms that were passed this legislative session,
Mm-hmm.
but ought to be a jumping off point for any other future education reforms that we do, because if that student is not graduating career college and military ready, that has long-term and short-term impacts on the workforce. Mm-hmm. So public school performance needs to improve.
Agreed. Let's turn to one more major issue that is taking on national implications, but has recently sort of hit Texas, and that's the issue of the homeless. We see stories, I do frequently, about the homeless populations in San Francisco, Los Angeles, living in the streets, creating a lot of problems in the streets, both for trash, sanitary conditions and other things, along with needles and other things of that nature. And then also oftentimes harassing people who are going by just trying to get to work or walking or something of that nature. But that has actually emerged in Texas as well. I was looking at the Housing and Urban Development, the U.S. Housing and Urban Development annual study on the homeless population, and I was a little bit surprised. Of the 15 major cities with the highest homeless populations, 4 of those cities are in California, 4 of them are in Texas. Though in Dallas, which was one of those in that category, you don't see the homeless camping out downtown. That apparently has become a big problem in Austin.
That's absolutely right. I mean, what's gone on the West Coast, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle is coming to Texas, manifest most dramatically in Austin. And there was a homeless problem prior to last summer, but when the city council at the mayor's urging had lifted what was called our camping ban,
mm-hmm.
immediately consequential to that was you could see these campsites springing up all around the city in public spaces that are quite obvious. I mean, downtown Austin, there's a small camping site near the Amtrak station down in downtown Austin and so forth. The conditions on the streets obviously materially changed in very short order, and it alarmed a lot of people, and it certainly caught the governor's attention, and he's jumped right in on this issue, making very forceful statements about it, mm-hmm. and looking for the state to take action.
And for our listeners, we have a link to the letter that the governor sent to the mayor of Austin on our website, pointofview.net, so you can go there and take a look at that. And John, I was just surprised how strongly worded that was, because I think the governor's right in every aspect of this. But what we're seeing happen in Los Angeles, San Francisco, and apparently in Austin is the city councils seem to just ignore this. I mean, or else they just try to throw money at it by having, I think they have volunteers, and they're even paying people in San Francisco to go by and clean up the streets rather than dealing with the problem. What does the governor want the city council of Austin to do?
Well, first and foremost, is to reverse or reinstate the camping ban. That was the proximate cause in the rise of this issue in downtown Austin. But it's certainly not the only thing. The governor has made clear in letter to Mayor Adler that he expects that by November 1st there be substantial progress,
which is coming up soon here,
right around the corner. And the city council here thus far, to our knowledge, has not taken a significant action. So I would anticipate the governor follow through with bringing state resources to bear to make sure that we don't create public health problems, water quality problems, public safety problems that are consequential to the homeless issue, as evidenced not just in Texas, but as I say, 4 major West Coast cities that have a very significant and growing and serious problem.
We when the state steps in on things like this with regard to cities and counties, the mayors or whoever begin to start crying, local control, you don't have the right to step in and do this. Though I noticed that in Dallas, when the city completely messed up the Dallas police officers' pension fund, they come to the state with hands out saying, please bail us out, please bail us out. We like local control, but in some cases, especially in cities that have become sort of blue-run cities, these things are going on, and the state has a right to step in, doesn't it?
It certainly does, and I know what I'm about to share with your listeners is a viewpoint you and I share, and that's this: whether the cities are red or blue is immaterial to the fundamental point about governance, and that is states created the federal government. The state creates political subdivisions, including municipalities. The notion of local control has become something of mythology, both in Texas and I'm sure in other states as well, in this regard. If the cities derive their powers from the state, and it is clear and unequivocal based on our constitutional structure and our statutory structure, that the state has authority to make changes as to how those cities are governed. In this specific instance, it is clear under Texas law that our Human Services Commission, our State Health Services Commission, our Commission on Environmental Quality, Department of Public Safety, all of which have clear and unequivocal statutory authority to help in a crisis like this that is only the consequence of very bad public policy. And I'll add, as it relates to Austin, is this, that all you had to do, all any individual has to do is read about, and if not, go directly observe what has happened in 4 major West Coast cities to realize that the consequences of these progressive policies are fundamentally inhumane and serve no useful purpose either for the person living on the street or the person who having to deal with the individuals living on the street. There are smarter, more sensible solutions to this, and that's what the governor is concerned about, and that's why the governor has been very direct with the city of Austin about what his intentions are.
John, as we're coming to a close to this segment, take about 1 minute to tell the listeners where the governor would like to go in the next session.
I think there are 3 fundamental issues, some of which we've already talked about. There is much more progress that needs to be made on occupational licensing as a particular issue, but about workforce writ large. If Texas is going to remain in its primary position as the leading economic state in the country, more must be done about occupational licensing, workforce development, and workforce participation. Number 2, the education debate is far from over. While the legislature did an extraordinary job following the lead of both Governor Abbott and our Texas Public School Finance Commission, the work of public education reform is not done in one legislative session. Mm-hmm. There's so much to do in terms of improving our teaching corps, making sure that we have standards in place regarding accountability, and that we're providing support to students and their families so that they can derive the most benefit out of a public education. And number 3, the same holds true about property taxation. It is so adversely impactful to economic growth and people's ability to afford a home that it requires constant vigilance. Gentrification is a real problem in Texas, as it is elsewhere. When you hear people talk about affordable housing, the advocates of affordable housing rarely want to utter the words property taxation.
Yeah, well, I'm glad the governor is going to take care of or address that problem. My guest for this hour has been John Colyandro, Senior Advisor and Policy Director for Governor Greg Abbott. You can find out more information about him on our website at pointofview.net, and you can also find a link to the governor's letter to the mayor of Austin about the homeless problem. John, thank you so much for joining us.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much.
When we come back, we're looking at single-payer healthcare systems.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And with me in studio for this segment, Erin Humiston. She's with the Institute for Policy Innovation, been there about 12 years now, I think. But she recently had a piece published in The Hill about an issue that is roiling the country. Because Bernie Sanders says if we want good health care like Canada, then just look up there. They spend half what we do. They get health care for everyone. It just works so well. And you started looking around at some of the stories coming out of Canada. What did you find?
That's right, buddy. Thank you for having me. As you may know, but for your listeners, since 2011, when Obamacare was passed, the Institute for Policy Innovation has been working to warn that Obamacare would wreak so much havoc on the individual health insurance market, that it would cause premiums and deductibles to soar and price families such as my own. I have 3 small children out of the market, that it would only be a matter of time.
Right. You had to go to the Christian sharing market just to be able to find something affordable.
Yes, we did. And it's still quite a price to pay, to be honest. But we warned it would just be a matter of time until Democrats came back and said, see, this is why we need single payer. And so that's
Which is exactly what we're seeing.
Yeah, we predicted it, and it's happening. So we are working to pull the curtain back and expose the cruel and harsh reality of these single payer systems. And so I wanted to also tell a story about how it affects the terminally ill, which is very sad. And so in The Hill, I wrote a piece profiling the life of an ALS patient named Sean Taggart.
That's Lou Gehrig's disease.
Yes, you may remember Stephen Hawking had it. And this patient, Sean Taggart, chose to commit suicide back in August after the government continually refused to grant him the care that his doctor said that he needed. He needed 24/7 care. But in the single payer system, the government enters into the doctor-patient relationship and decides how much care that you get. And so Sean's doctor said this man needs 24-hour care in his home, but the Canadian government said, no, he gets 15 hours. That's it. Leaving him to hold the bag and to figure out how to fund the rest of his care, which for him amounted to $8,000 a month. So again, it is not true what Bernie Sanders says as Bernie Sanders is leaving the hospital after his heart attack scare. When you have a medical emergency, he said, you don't need to worry about going bankrupt for your care. Medicare for all. It's just not true.
You know, this isn't a one-off. We see these stories all the time. There's a YouTube story out there of a lady who lived in Nova Scotia, and she came down with cancer, and she needed to go to a cancer specialist to start getting treatment. But under the Canadian system, you have to go to a primary care doctor first, and the primary care doctor gives you the referral to go to the specialist. You can't go otherwise. And her primary care doctor moved away. And so she had no more primary care doctor. And because all of them are overbooked, it took her a couple of years to be able to finally get a primary care doctor. Let me say that, a couple of years before she could get to a primary care doctor. By that time, her cancer had gone much more serious. She's in the middle of radiation treatments. And she says, I think she said, I'm 31 years old. I'll never be able to have a child again. All of this could have been stopped if I could have gotten to a doctor in timely fashion. And what she was doing was calling out the head of Nova Scotia, the government, who had just said, we've got great health care here. And she said, you come and look me in the eye and tell me we've got great health care because of what I've gone through. We see these stories all the time, but the media and Democrats just simply ignore them.
They simply ignore it. And we just can't have this in our country. So we have to tell these stories. So going back to Sean, the week that he finally died, took his life through physician-assisted suicide, the Canadian healthcare provider, which for him was Vancouver Coastal Health, they actually showed up to his house to announce a further cut in funding for his care. And by that point, he had battled for so long against not just a horrific disease, but against the government. And he found his situation so dire, he chose to end it by physician-assisted suicide. And that is also something we cannot ignore. That is a very sinister aspect of Canada's healthcare system. It's called, the program they have is called MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying. And there are billboards for this service. There are ads for this service in emergency rooms. So just imagine that you're a patient and you enter into an emergency room. By the way, the wait time there on average is about 7 hours to see somebody when you go to emergency rooms. And what is there to keep you company but a reminder from the sweet Canadian healthcare system that if you want to end it all, we'll help you.
It sends the wrong message. But people sometimes ask me, well, aren't the people in Canada, don't most of them like their healthcare system? And the answer to that is yes. And that's in large part because most people don't use much healthcare during the year. If you just need to go get a flu shot, you need to go see the doctor because you've got a cold or a sore throat or something like that, the system works fairly well. but it's the marginal people, the very, very young, the very, very old, the very, very sick, very poor, who they get marginalized in this, and they simply can't provide the funds for them. There's not enough of them to create enough of a pushback. They don't vote in most cases. And so the politicians are able to get away with something. If you can please 51% of the population with your single-payer healthcare system, you can do okay. And that's what we're seeing there.
Well, and if you're a terminal patient, you pray to God that you're not going to be in Canada's system, because there's a statistic that says about only 15% of terminal patients got quality palliative care in their final year. And last year, 3,000 Canadians chose to end their lives through this physician-assisted suicide service that they have.
And nothing's cheaper on the healthcare system than a patient who's died.
And that is a very ghoulish thought, isn't it? But still, if you're in a single-payer system, how do you avoid the government not seeing your needs for care to be excessive in comparison to the limited dollars that are available for everybody? How do you avoid that? And
this is systemic in the system. I had a friend who was a pediatric orthopedic surgeon. He was at the Hospital for Sick Children in Canada, largest children's hospital, I think, in the world. He eventually came to Texas to practice medicine because he said he invented a clamp that would help children with spinal difficulties after they had the surgery. They would be able to get up and walk in a week or so. They'd be able to get up and leave the hospital. He thought this was going to be a great new service, but he told me he was criticized by the hospital because it meant children were getting up and out of the bed earlier, opening up that bed for another expensive patient, rather than taking up the bed for 3 or 4 weeks, which cost a whole lot less. And he was flabbergasted by that. And he decided, I've got to go someplace else where I can provide quality care for my patients. So he left Canada. Well, listen, it's an interesting story. We have a link to that on the Point of View website, pointofview.net. So if you want to see Erin's story in the Hill, you can go to pointofview.net and find that. You can also find a short bio of her, and she'll be doing some more things on this issue, I think, in the future, because it's a big issue, right?
It's a huge issue. And the more that Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders try to tell us that it's a great system and you'll have no worries, we've got to expose that as the scam that it is.
And the media simply won't cover these stories. You oftentimes have to go to the Canadian media, the British media, and so forth to find them.
That's right. That's right. It's a convenient little lie, isn't it?
Well, Erin, thank you for joining us. You can find that story in the Hill on pointofview.net. Just go there and click on the link, and you'll be able to see that story. When we come back, we're changing directions again, and we're going to talk about the issue of evolution and creation with two major scientists. Stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
And welcome to Point of View. This is Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and we have got a great show for you for the next 2 hours. We're going to be talking about the issue of creation, evolution, what we should believe about those, and a great organization, the Institute for Creation Research, and their new center out there, the Discovery Center, that just opened up in September. Joining me in studio, Charles Stolfus, one of the executive pastors of Denton Bible Church. Charles, thank you for joining us.
Good to be here.
And with two of our scientist scholars here. We've got Dr. Jeff Tomkins. He earned a master's degree in plant science in 1990 from University of Idaho, where he performed research on plant hormones. He received his PhD in genetics from Clemson University in 1996. And Brian Thomas, he received a master's degree in biotechnology in 1999 from Stephen F. Austin State University, and he got his PhD in paleobiochemistry in 2019 from the University of Liverpool. So he is both of these scholars who are been working in this area for a long time, and you've both been with the Institute for Creation Research, the Creation Research Institute, for some time. So let's start out by talking a little bit about ICR and what it's doing. It's sort of its history and its mission. So Jeff, we'll start with you.
Well, the history of ICR, ICR was started out as a group of scientists that were devoted to debunking evolution and showing how the creation science model in the book of Genesis better fits the data. And in fact, when I first became a Christian in the early 1980s, I was raised a total pagan for the most part, and was a complete evolutionist, but became a Christian when I was getting my bachelor's degree at Washington State University. And ICR's material was foundational in my faith, in solidifying my faith. And I was being bombarded by evolutionary ideas by my professors. But ICR's material, especially the book Scientific Creationism, which is done by Henry Morris II and was a foundational book in the creation science movement, just changed my life. And so ever since then, ICR has been publishing books and materials and showing how the scientific data better fits a Genesis account of origins.
Dr. Brian Thomas, the Henry Morris started this a long time ago. I mean, he was a lone voice out there for a while, was he not?
From what I heard, but that's before my time.
It was before a lot of people's time, because I think it's about 40 years ago or so, wasn't it?
It was. Well, the Institute for Creation Research officially began the year before I was born. That would be 1970. And before that, I think it was 61 or 63 when the Genesis flood came out.
His book, The Genesis Flood.
His book, Henry Morris co-founded the Institute for Creation Research. Prior to that founding, he wrote that book. And that book was the beginning of a new way to think. And instead of having millions of years required to deposit rock layers, you don't need a lot of time. You just need a lot of water. And Genesis flood provided that water.
Jeff, what is the mission of the Institute for Creation Research? What are you trying to do?
Well, we're trying to reach the church and the general public, with the creation message. And we're trying to show that the Bible is true. It's valid. There is a creator. God created everything exactly like he said he did in the book of Genesis. There was a global flood, which accounts for the geology that we see all over the earth, the billions of dead, buried things, the fossils. There was a real dispersal at Babel, which created all of the different people groups that we see all over the earth. So the Bible has scientific answers for everything that we see in the world around us, and then we're trying to show that.
And Brian, the ICR started out with Henry Morris. It was a small group, but you've grown significantly since then.
Well, I think, let's see. Well, we started the Discovery Center last month, and so
just the staff of the ICR.
The staff of the ICR was about 45 members totals, and that includes business people and scientists and internet people and book publishing people and the whole thing. So yeah, it's grown a bit, and that was, of course, after the move from the San Diego area, where we were for 36 years, to the Dallas area, where we've now been for a little over a decade.
So you moved to Dallas a little over a decade ago,
right? And
you've been here that long, then. Right? What areas do the scientists at ICR cover? I mean, you cover a range of different topics, so you're not just anthropologists. You cover a bunch of different areas.
Yeah, we cover the gamut: biology, genetics. I'm a geneticist and a biologist by background. We have a geologist who actually worked for Chevron in the oil and gas industry for a number of years. He also taught as a professor, and he's making groundbreaking discoveries on the global flood. We have a climate physicist who is doing amazing research on the Ice Age and climate and addressing that controversy. We have another physicist, a nuclear physicist, who has addressed the issue of radiometric dating. He has a brand new book out on that that's excellent. And we have Brian, who is into the paleo.
Yeah, that big word.
Paleo, what was it? That paleochemistry, where Brian is showing that there are organic compounds in fossils that should not be there, and that just covers an entire gamut of things, which he'll tell you about. So we cover the entire spectrum of science, and we've got scientists in every specialty.
Charles, you teach classes at Denton Bible Church. You have you sort of look over various groups to have them come in. How do you rate ICR's outreach, their materials, as compared to, say, other groups, or just their ability for people to be able to access them and understand them?
Well, I'm a huge fan of ICR and have been for many, many years. They were especially formative in my own development, in my own effort to understand these issues. And the reason why is because they target the harmony between what the Bible has to say, but also what the physical evidence has to say. They're not apologizing for what the Bible says, but they're not just simply leaving it there, thus says the Lord. They're saying, okay, this fits best with the evidence that we see, whether it's geology or biology or physics or any number of the other hard sciences. It is best explained according to a theory of origins that the Bible describes. And so it was especially formative. And so I go to them over and over again for my own personal study, but also even as a pastor at Denton Bible, to bring in speakers. I'm just often going to their organization to really highlight and target particular issues. I mean, just recently we had Jeff in to talk about the question, are humans and apes related? I mean, that's something that everyone is kind of wondering about, I guess. And he came in and gave just a first-rate explanation. Here's the evidence.
Good. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a minute to talk about the Discovery Center that just opened.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, if you think about it, your life is the culmination of lots and lots of decisions. Jim Clifton, CEO of Gallup, argues that people make 10,000 to 20,000 small decisions every day. If you multiply this by the U.S. population, you end up with 1 quadrillion decisions. This is one of the points Jeff Myers makes in his book, Understanding the Culture. The legacy you leave is the sum of all your decisions. Many are inconsequential. Others determine the future direction of your life. Some don't seem that important at the time, but they turn out to be some of the most significant decisions you ever made. So how should we make decisions? First, we should consult the Bible. We know that God's will can be found in the Bible since it is full of specific commands and principles. Second, we should pray. We can discern God's will through prayer. Philippians 4:6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God." Third, consult your conscience. If your conscience troubles you, then there is reason that you should stop and not proceed. Acts 24:16 says, Christians should strive to have a good conscience before God and man. By the way, a clear conscience isn't always a justification for proceeding. The Bible teaches the heart is deceitful above all things. We can easily deceive ourselves into sin. Finally, seek counsel. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Wisdom comes from many counselors. Share your decision with other godly men and women. Their collective response will often provide God's direction in a matter. As Christians, we should strive to make wise and godly decisions about our life. How we make decisions will affect the rest of our life and leave a legacy of faith for others to follow. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson, and with me in studio, Dr. Jeff Tomkins and Dr. Brian Thomas of the Institute for Creation Research, and Charles Stolfus, an executive pastor, one of the executive pastors at Denton Bible Church, and we are talking about creation, evolution, and right now, let's talk about the new Discovery Center that opened up, I think, like September 5, September 6. I've been there, Charles. I went there last week, and I am amazed at this place. I'm stunned. It is so well done. And Charles, you've been there a couple of times.
I've been a couple of times already, and the planetarium is really cool to really just see visualized, pictures and really illustrations of how the solar system functions and other things like that. But also the various exhibits that highlight everything from the Ice Age to the Grand Canyon as a great illustration of how change can happen very rapidly in the areas of geology. So just a lot of different exhibits there.
So, Dr. Thomas, how long did it take y'all to create the Discovery Center? You've been building on it for a little while and just opened it up. And how is that going? What was the vision behind that?
Well, it took millions of years to make the Discovery Center. The vision...
did it evolve over time?
That's right. It evolved over... the vision crystallized, I would say, about 3 years ago. And then we had a large donation come in that confirmed for us that this is the direction we needed to go in. So then we contracted with exhibit planners and architects, and we began rolling it forward. But the whole reason we wanted to do it is to build a destination where people could come and see in a way that you just can't see on an internet computer screen.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't see necessarily in the page of a book, as valuable as those are. But to see on display the evidence that supports creation and supports, like Jeff is saying, the Genesis account of creation.
Speaking of the internet, we have the ICR's website on the Point of View homepage, and you can go there, and I've actually watched, there's a very short video of the Discovery Center. I think it's 20, 30 seconds, so it doesn't give you it's not a full tour, but it gives you just a sort of a general sense of what's going on there. But how did you... Dr. Tomkins, all of you, my understanding is you're called on to speak to the groups. So groups come into, you've got a fairly large auditorium there, and y'all give regular briefings to people on various issues that you relate to your expertise.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a beautiful high-tech auditorium. It has a beautiful screen. Everything is just cutting edge as far as the media goes. And the scientists give talks twice on Fridays and twice on Saturdays. And then if we have a special group come in, then we can arrange a talk that way as well. But all of the different scientists give talks. Brian gave a talk this morning to a large group. And so it's an awesome way to augment the exhibits and all the interactive displays and things that are in the Discovery Center.
Charles mentioned the planetarium there, and in there you have, I'm guessing, 40 chairs, 45 chairs or something. People kind of lean back. It's a round dome up there, and you get to see pictures of space. But they also have, I believe you also have one in the ocean, right?
That's exactly
Done by
right.
Jacques Cousteau's grandson, I think.
Yeah.
So they have that, but then you walk through this sort of, there's a path that you go through. There's creation. Then you walk into, I think, the Garden of Eden, and then there's a place where you walk into where you see there's Babylon. There's several different rooms that sort of take you through a history timeline that I found, especially the creation room and some of those just amazing. The technology, the video, the audio, it is unbelievable.
Right, some of the animatronic dinosaurs that really kind of help, especially for kids to be able to see, wow, that's what a dinosaur actually looked like. And the size of the T-Rex there is just an enormous dinosaur there, right, that you can just see what must it have been like, when humans and dinosaurs at some point in Earth's history coincided in the pre-fall world. So,
right. And they you walk through that. You get a sort of a general sense of it, and of course there's the garden and the Grand Canyon. They have you have a model Grand Canyon. I think Jamie there told me it took like 3 months to build and paint and so forth. It's interesting. But I noticed this too when I went to the restroom. The lavatories are done in a Grand Canyon style, so there's various levels. It looks like you're looking down on the Grand Canyon. A lot of thought going into this. Are you getting a big turnout for this, Dr. Tomkins?
Yeah, and the crowds are increasing as the word gets out. So yes, I think they are quite pleased with the response.
So we would encourage our listeners to get a chance to go there and take a look at it. Do they need to set up an appointment? Can they just show up? How does that work?
Yeah, you can buy tickets online. And that's the best way to make sure you get the planetarium show that you want when you want to get it. But the other option is to just show up at the corner of Royal and Luna, and we'll take them however you can get here.
It's fairly easy to get there.
Hey, buddy, I think the other thing is interesting that groups can sign up for special times to maybe go at the same time or to have a special speaker address the group. And so that's a neat thing for church groups, homeschool groups, or just larger groups.
Well, let's get into a little bit on the issue that we want to talk about today, which is evolution and creation. So this is sort of you have a number of scientists, but it's your major focus to talk about that. And we should mention that you have a free publication, Acts and Facts. I get that. And read it every month when it comes out, because is it every month, or is there a month or two that you spend? I think it's
every month.
Every month. So it and Dr. Tomkins, you had one in the most recent one, I think, talking about evolution. Tell us a little bit about your background and why you decided to move into the to the discipline that you did.
Well, really, it was God's hand on my life that took me down the path that I took. And I ended up getting a PhD in genetics and was very successful after that as a faculty member.
And you were not a Christian at this time?
No, I was.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Yeah. I became a Christian when I was getting my bachelor's degree at the age of 20 at Washington State University. But I had no idea that I would end up working at ICR, the ministry that was foundational in my faith as a young Christian. And so here I am all these years later working at ICR, but I was actually working as a faculty member at a major university. I had to kind of, lay low, so to speak. I mean, people knew I was a Christian, but you can't really speak out against the religion of evolution, which is what I call it. It's a religion because you have to believe in it by faith. In fact, it takes more faith to believe that stuff created itself than a creator did it, which is quite obvious, as Romans 1:20 says in the Bible. But I felt like I was spinning my wheels as at a big university. I couldn't, do really what I wanted to do as far as speaking out about the truth of creation, and so I just left at a good point in my career. That was a good kind of a transition point. I had a number of grants that were finishing up. I had a PhD student that had just completed his degree, so I figured, well, this is a good time to make a break and go to ICR. So I did that about 10 years ago.
So you knew you were going to ICR when you left there?
Yes, I had a relationship with people at ICR, kind of, personally before that. So I knew the people there, had been talking with them and working with them to a certain extent. Just.
Was that in itself a leap of faith? I mean, you've got a good job at a university. Now you're moving to a nonprofit that exists on donations, and sometimes donations go up and sometimes they go down. Was that a struggle for you? Was that a challenge?
It was a challenge. I had to take a big pay cut and go to work for a nonprofit in the big city like Dallas, which I wasn't used to. So it was a huge leap of faith, but God has blessed it and provided.
When we come back, we want to turn to you, Dr. Thomas, and then get your background and how you decided on the discipline that you decided to move in. And let's begin to address this issue of evolution and what's happening out there, because as you mentioned, Dr. Tomkins, it has become a religion these days. It is something where people, if you question evolution, you're considered, I guess, a fringe person, maybe a good candidate for a mental institution, because you're questioning the science that is out there, and that's become a real challenge for a lot of people to sort of overcome that leap. So when we come back, we'll turn to Dr. Thomas to get his background, and then we'll start addressing some of these questions. So stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
So when people first hear about Medi-Share, they have questions. Some good ones, like, what is it? Well, Medi-Share is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry. It's not health insurance. It's a different way of doing things, which leads us to this question. Why do so many become Medi-Share members? Two big reasons. They save a lot. The typical family saves $500 a month, and they feel great about it. With Medi-Share, you aren't forced to pay for things you don't believe in. Find out more. 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40.
It seems we can't get through a day without hearing how science has been corrupted to support political goals. Media entities have sold out truth for the sake of favored narratives. Even some religious groups have abandoned the Bible to support things based on feelings. So who can you trust? Kirby Anderson and the Point of View Truth Team are your source for real news. Learn how you can make a difference by joining the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. In a world of unending fog, Point of View is a shining light. Do your part at pointofview.net/team or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And around the table today, we have Charles Stolfus of Denton Bible Church and Dr. Jeff Tomkins and Dr. Brian Thomas, both of the Institute for Creation Research. And we're talking about the intersection of creation and evolution. And Dr. Thomas, we left that last segment saying we'd come back to you to talk a little bit about why you chose, you had biotechnology, I think, in the early years. And why did you choose the field that you did?
I went into biotechnology because a job opened up. It was just pragmatic. So I had a job as a lab technician, and I worked for a PhD who said, you know, you're doing all this research in the lab, you might as well get a degree for it. And I said, hey, good idea. And so signed up for the classes, took all that and jumped through all those hoops, and was one of the first graduates of that program. That was back in the December of 1999, and then school teaching, and then later on the Institute for Creation Research as a writer. And then I was at a science conference about 5 years ago, and a fellow conferee, if that's a word, came up and said, I'm really interested in what you're doing, because in addition to writing, I had been doing academic research, not hands-on as much, into the issue of these discoveries of original biochemicals still in fossils, whole tissues, blood vessels and the like, still inside fossils, bearing age assignments of 70 million plus years. How can tissues last that long? So I really wanted to investigate that issue. And he said, how would you like to get a PhD under me? And I said, no, I have a life and a job and I'm fine. And they said, well, what if your life allowed it, and what if your wife allowed it? so all the green lights turned on and go, and I just completed that a few months ago. Praise the Lord.
So the Institute for Creation Research has been challenging the notion that we got here through evolution rather than creation. Dr. Tomkins, you've been giving presentations, and then your article in Acts and Facts raises some questions about the evolution story, the narrative there. Because if we hear evolutionists, many of them will say, we've got missing links, or we've got something close to missing links. We can pretty well trace this all the way back, so we know we're on the right path. We may differ on a few of the specifics. There may be a few little gaps there, but generally we know this is the case because we have the evidence. And you've been talking recently and sort of raising questions about that evidence that they claim they have.
Well, when I first got to ICR, they asked me to look into the DNA similarity issue between humans and chimpanzees, because that was kind of at the forefront of the whole human origins issue. And I said, okay, I don't know what I'll find, but I'll look into it, because at Clemson, my research focused on plants and other animals and all sorts of things besides humans and chimps. So I didn't know what I'd find. I had no, preconception. So I began looking at the literature, the major journal publications that purported a close similarity. First thing I noticed was they were cherry picking the data. They were throwing out data that didn't match up well between humans and chimps as far as DNA sequence data. And I'm saying, there's some major problems here. So I figured out just by adding the data in they threw out, where I could figure that out from the materials and methods, and sometimes those were kind of sloppy, but I figured out there was only a 66 to an 86% similarity depending on the paper and the DNA regions they looked at. So I said, okay, something is going on.
And for our listeners, that's a huge difference. I mean,
it
may sound close, but that's a big difference.
Yeah, and then I said, well, I'll look into this myself, and it's been a long project, and there's a lot of ins and outs to it. But I published a paper in 2018, which is my most current research, and I came up with a maximum DNA similarity of 84% between humans and chimps. At about the same time, a geneticist, an evolutionary geneticist at the University of London, also put up on a blog that he maintained the exact same numbers, maximum 84% similarity. So God providentially had my research coincide with his, and he used a different approach than I did. So the issue is that we're not 98 to 99% similar as evolutionists have claimed in the past. And so why is that important? Well, because you need literally a 99% similarity to make evolution from an ape ancestor to even seem possible based on mutation rates and theoretical genetics. So,
and the evolutionists generally agree with that. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. And of course, that's so 84% totally kicks that out of the ballpark.
And, buddy, this is an extraordinary point to make. I mean, the context is, for quite some time, the scientific community is arguing for the relatedness between humans and chimps based upon largely this alleged 99% similarity in the DNA. Mm-hmm. And then, lo and behold, when you look carefully at it, having cherry-picked all the information, that's the only way that you can get to 99%. Now it's much, much less than that, and now that really is one of the primary lines of evidence that's been undermined and destroyed.
So how is the scientific community, the evolutionary community, responding to this? I mean, they may have dismissed you, but the professor in, what was it, England, did you say?
Yes.
Who came out with that, and he's a believer, I suspect, so he's one of their camp. How do they respond to that?
Silence. So on the internet, no one has been able to question this guy in England. He's even put his computer programs up, available for public scrutiny, so people can repeat.
Science, that's right.
Right.
Science, you want to be able to have this repeatable.
Right, and just silence. There's nothing to argue with. That's what the data says. And I would also like to add, 84% is a maximum similarity. There's areas between humans and chimps that you can't even match up at this point. So the overall similarity is probably lower than 84%, but that's a maximum, and that kicks evolution out the door.
And Dr. Thomas, you've been talking about the DNA and the preservation of this. And as I understand from Acts and Facts and some of the articles I've been reading there, the notion is that proteins and things like that are not supposed to last very long. And if you find it in dinosaur bones or other places, then that sort of raises a question about the age of the fossils. Is that right?
It does to me, but it doesn't raise the question to those who are fully committed to the age assignment and totally unwilling to talk about that. It's kind of like greeted with silence, like Jeff's research. You know, I spoke about this to a gal who was she said she was a paleontology student, and she's doing some fossil prep work at a museum in Houston. And I said, hey, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing fossil prep work. Hey, have you heard about soft tissues still inside fossils? Mm-hmm. And she said, yeah, because she has to say that because she knows everything because she's a student. And then I said, well, what do you think of them? How do you explain that they're still soft, inside these fossils? And she stopped and looked at me and she said, they're not soft because they're fossilized. So silence. Her profs aren't telling her anything about this revolution in paleontology, this soft tissue. They're just not interacting with the data, which is one of the reasons why we at the Institute want to do what we do. We want to show folks through the Discovery Center and through our website and through our magazine, everything else, hey, there's good science that people are ignoring. Stop ignoring it. Pay attention to it.
Yeah, and Dr. Thomas, for our listeners, it might be helpful just to say what they found. I mean, starting back in, back in 2005 with Dr. Mary Schweitzer, she made this discovery of soft tissue in dinosaur bones. But since then, a significant amount of material has been found in multiple different species of dinosaurs. What have they found? In what sources have they found that? What are we talking about here?
What are we talking about? You want the short version or?
Yeah, the short version.
The 1 minute version.
The 1 minute version. Well, that's all in my thesis, chapter 1, where I outline 100, outside my thesis, I have a separate list of 100 different technical publications that each one of which describes soft tissue or a biochemical inside of a bone. And they come from all kinds of rock layers, even Cambrian and even Precambrian rocks have fossils in them with tissues still in them. Now, these have age assignments of more than 520 million supposed years, and yet there's tissue that can't last more than a couple thousand.
And so we're talking material in dinosaurs like Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops. I mean, a wide variety of dinosaurs here that should have been extinct a long time ago. Why do we still find this biologic material?
When we come back, we'll take on the issue of evolution and creation and humans. Stay with us.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back. We're talking evolution today and creation. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. If you have a question or a comment about evolution, creation, the Institute for Creation Research, and just that whole evolutionary debate. With me in studio, Dr. Jeff Tomkins and Dr. Brian Thomas, both with the Institute for Creation Research, and Charles Stolfus, a executive pastor at Denton Bible Church. Charles.
Dr. Thomas and Dr. Tompkins, I would say that a straightforward reading of the Bible would indicate that the earth is on the order of thousands of years old. And I know that the Institute for Creation Research is committed to that biblical proposition. You've suggested that the scientific or the physical evidence supports that. Could you, for the benefit of our listeners, could you give us some of the best evidences, in your opinion, for a young Earth?
Yeah, I think the poster child or the best evidence is the area that Dr. Thomas is working in. So I'll let him talk about that, and then I'll say a few things maybe about genetic clocks and mutation rate.
Okay, so we have a clock in fossils, and it's the protein clock. It's more like a egg timer, and so it's still ticking. If it's millions of years old, it should have gone ding and expired, but it has not yet expired. So we have soft tissues, including whole tissues, connective tissues, blood vessels, blood cells, bone cells.
So this biological material that you've suggested in our previous hour, that is from samples of dinosaurs that's still in existence. That's an argument in favor of a recent Earth.
Well, I could phrase it like, first of all, it's not just dinosaurs. We've got sponges and fishes and you name it, all kinds of fossils throughout all kinds of rock layers, top to bottom, and on every continent except so far Australia. And it's just a matter of time before someone discovers some down there, down under. But yeah, that's one way to answer that question is to remove the millions of years. If you remove the millions of years from your thinking, then you can maintain proteins' known measurable decay rate, and you can maintain conformity with the fact of hundreds of fossil discoveries of soft tissues or biochemicals. But if you have the millions of years, then you have to pretend that either the decay rate studies are wrong, or you have to pretend that the tissue is not real. And I'm not willing to part with either of those scientific observations. But I am willing to part with the millions of years.
And Dr. Tompkins?
Yeah, one really interesting area of research, and much of it has been done in the secular world, is that there is variation between and among humans and all the different types of creatures, worms and lizards and things like that. And the variation that we see between humans, there's two types. There's common, what are called common variants, which creationists believe were present in the original founding couple, Adam and Eve. And then there's also areas of our DNA that are random mutations. And these areas, most commonly, and the majority of these, are actually associated with human disease of one type or another. They're not helpful and beneficial. Mutations do not do anything good. They're generally mostly harmful. Some might be neutral, but generally speaking, they're bad. So when we look at these types of mutations, these rare ones or bad ones, and we develop our clocks based on demographics and without any kind of interjection of deep time, but just practical, pragmatic DNA clocks, it shows that humans could be no more than 10,000 years old, or the human race. In fact, one scientific study said 5,000 years, which is very interesting because we know Noah's flood, or the global flood, was about 4,300 years ago. And so these scientific studies that have been done by secular scientists actually match up with a biblical timeline. And so we're not seeing millions of years of evolution in human DNA. We're seeing thousands.
1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to call in with a question or a comment about evolution and creation. Charles, what is the role of creation with respect to a biblical understanding? Or do the two have to go hand in hand?
A biblical understanding of what? I mean, I would argue that Genesis, in a very significant way, is foundational to just about everything else in the Bible. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't only appear first in the order of books of the Bible, but it really does address most of the foundational issues for the rest of the Bible. In fact, one commentary on the book of Revelation actually linked Genesis and Revelation together in what looks like a very explicit, conscious effort to introduce themes in Genesis that are subsequently tied up and really fulfilled in the book of Revelation. And so everything in between is advancing the fulfillment of these things that are introducing. You have the entrance of sin and the curse in the garden. You have the exit of sin and the curse in the garden. The tempter is introduced there in the garden. The tempter is banished forever in the eternal state. And so everything in between, even in a chronological sense, is advancing this fulfillment of these things that were introduced in Genesis that would be fulfilled and consummated in the book of Revelation. So in a very explicit way, Genesis is seen as a foundational, not just simply in the areas of creation, but in the thematic content of the entire Bible.
And the role of God as creator creates a certain type of relationship. So you find this in Job. You find the Apostle Paul talking about that once you recognize a creator God, then an awful lot of things follow from that.
Absolutely. I agree with that.
So that sort of establishes the ethics and so forth. Can God do this? Job, can God treat me this way? God's the creator. Where were you when I created the heavens? Or where were you when I created these things? It establishes a sort of an order that I think that evolution coming in sought to, in some ways, cut that relationship. Because if you don't have a moral order coming from the top, you have a moral order coming from individuals.
Yeah, and wasn't it Henry Morris that wrote a book, The Long War Against God? And it really is seeking to explain the rationale behind this long-running effort to undermine the creation account. That it really is an effort by secular man or an unbelieving man to really remove this foundational truth from the human experience. It's not a relevant issue, or maybe indeed it's actually false, they would argue.
We're talking about creation and evolution. The Institute for Creation Research has just recently opened its Discovery Center in Dallas, and we have a link to that on the Point of View website, so you can go to pointofview.net and find the website there. You can go take a very short tour of the Discovery Center and what's happening there. It is a phenomenal place to go, so we would encourage people to go there and take a look at it. They can also, at the Institute for Creation Research, sign up for Acts and Facts, because that is a free publication that y'all make available with the research from Dr. Tomkins, Dr. Thomas, and several others of your scholars there, addressing a whole bunch of these issues. So if you'd like to talk about this, you have a question, 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back in a minute, we'll start talking about the role of evolution in the country's mindset, how that's affecting us. So stay with us, and we'll be back in just a minute.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting Truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back. Merrill Matthews with the Institute for Policy Innovation, sitting in for Kirby Anderson. And with me in studio today, Dr. Jeff Tomkins and Dr. Brian Thomas, both of the Institute for Creation Research, and Charles Stolfus, one of the executive pastors at Denton Bible Church. And we've had a call come in. Kat has got an interesting question for us, so let's open it up. Kat, you in New Hampshire, you are on the air.
Hi, thank you for taking my question.
Sure.
My question is, do you know of any colleges or universities with programs at the undergraduate, master's, and doctorate level populated by creationist instructors, especially in the sciences, that you can share with the listeners? It's mainly because I've been studying sciences and my children do, and at the college level, it seems like in the secular college, a lot of them, it's hard to find instructors who are not anti-creationist and who can be kind of volatile towards in their temperament towards people who do believe in God and creation.
Good, Kat. We'll get them to answer your question. I'm going to put you on hold because we're getting some feedback from the noise there. But colleges, and she's not necessarily talking about Christian colleges. She's talking about some secular colleges too, I think. But colleges that allow that teach or allow Christians to teach there.
Yeah, I can give you a handful. Liberty University has a lot of creation-friendly professors. In Lynchburg, Virginia. Cedarville University in Ohio. The Masters College in California. Bob Jones University in Greenville, South Carolina. And I'm sure I probably missed a few others. Mm-hmm. I think Maranatha Bible College up in the Midwest does. But yes, at the undergraduate level, there's a number of choices that you can make. At the graduate level, I know Loma Linda University in California has some graduate programs there with Christian creationist professors. But if you're going to get a graduate degree, I would get a good foundation as an undergraduate in creation science, perhaps at maybe Liberty University, which is the largest one. And then you're going to have to go to a secular university to get your graduate degree. But if you've got a good foundation, you can go into that with a good base and a good knowledge base to with a strong faith and to also reach out to others. But yes, there are options.
Is a secular university going to give you a hard time if you come in as a Christian and a creation believer? Or are they going to accept you? Are they going to allow you to get through there? Or are they just going to give you a hard time?
Well, I just came through a program where I didn't get a hard time at all,
mm-hmm.
but I was expecting it the whole time I was in there. I mean, I work for the Institute for Creation Research. I didn't advertise that fact to
mm-hmm.
my colleagues at the university, but I'm essentially doing research into an area where we're looking at evidence that it's hard for the secular's position to accommodate the soft tissue issue. And my secular reviewers and examiners just looked at my data, and they said, okay, you're making conclusions based on your data. And it was okay, and it worked out fine. But I think it just depends on who your dean is. It just depends on who, it's kind of like potluck. But you got to trust God, and He's got it. Because I know some folks who have been kicked out just because of their beliefs, not because they did bad science, but because they ran into some dean who said, "We're not going to have you around here."
Now, Dr. Tompkins, you said you've actually taught some courses at Liberty University. Is that correct?
That's correct, right.
And but they don't offer a graduate degree or a PhD, a master's or a PhD in anything along those types of sciences. Is that a fair statement?
They were working on a master's program in the biological sciences. I'm not sure where they are with that as far as developing it. They do have a medical school there.
But as I understand, you sort of said, when you said you're going to have to go to a secular university if you're going to get the PhD, that's both something you'd have to do because there's not another option, but I guess also it's better to be tossed into the middle of these places where you actually have to defend yourself. Years ago, I wrote to J.I. Packer when he was teaching in Vancouver at Regent College, and I said, I'm graduating from seminary, thinking about doing a PhD in theology, and wondered about coming there. And he said, we don't offer the PhD program, and I'd suggest that you go to a secular college where you're thrown in with a whole lot of people who disagree with you because we think it makes better scholars out of you. And that's going to happen if you're going to try to get a PhD in one of the sciences. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. I do have some advice. If you're going to get a PhD at a big secular university, if you're going to be in the applied sciences rather than something like theoretical biology or evolution, you're going to have an easier time of it if it's more of an applied area. And there's applied areas in genetics.
And define applied.
Applied would be in the areas of, say, engineering, where you're actually working on applications that have some, use in industry or maybe the medical field. Maybe you're in biomedicine. That's a great field to be in, to avoid a lot of evolutionary pressure, so to speak. But if you're going to be in an area where there's a lot of, you're going to have to take a lot of courses in evolution, interact with a lot of theoretical evolutionary professors, you would better just keep a low profile. That would be the best suggestion, or you will get probably booted out. But yes, it is possible to get a PhD at a major university, and just keep a low profile. Don't be overly vocal. Get your degree, and then if you want to get into the creation science field, then you can do that and be more vocal then afterwards. But we need Christians in the biomedical field and the engineering fields and industry and academics all over the world.
Charles, you deal with education. It's a shame it's come to that, because you would think you'd be able to have various viewpoints at a university and not necessarily have to keep a low profile.
Exactly. And what we're finding out is in higher education, sometimes it's the least free environment in the country. A place where we would think that there would be free, open discussion and objective assessment of ideas. Many times these discussions are driven by agendas, and they're explicitly, consciously rejecting views that they simply don't favor. So I would say, even as you choose an academic institution, not all secular institutions are equal. So find a secular institution that at least addresses these subjects with a good degree of objectivity. The reason I mentioned that, I remember Michael Behe, one of the leading lights in the intelligent design movement. He said that when he first started encountering these ideas from within the intelligent design community, he said he had just finished his PhD at a leading research university and had never once heard any of these arguments. He'd read a book called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis by Michael Denton, and this is an evolutionist who was marshaling some of the physical evidences that argue against the theory of evolution being able to answer all these questions. And he says, I'd never heard any of this information. So that's important for us to also understand.
When we come back, we'll take more of your questions and we'll continue discussing the issue. Stay with us.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, if you think about it, your life is the culmination of lots and lots of decisions. Jim Clifton, CEO of Gallup, argues that people make 10,000 to 20,000 small decisions every day. If you multiply this by the U.S. population, you end up with 1 quadrillion decisions. This is one of the points Jeff Myers makes in his book, Understanding the Culture. The legacy you leave is the sum of all your decisions. Many are inconsequential. Others determine the future direction of your life. Some don't seem that important at the time, but they turn out to be some of the most significant decisions you ever made. So how should we make decisions? First, we should consult the Bible. We know that God's will can be found in the Bible since it is full of specific commands and principles. Second, we should pray. We can discern God's will through prayer. Philippians 4:6 says, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your request to God." Third, consult your conscience. If your conscience troubles you, then there is reason that you should stop and not proceed. Acts 24:16 says, Christians should strive to have a good conscience before God and man. By the way, a clear conscience isn't always a justification for proceeding. The Bible teaches the heart is deceitful above all things. We can easily deceive ourselves into sin. Finally, seek counsel. Proverbs 15:22 says, plans fail for lack of counsel, but with many advisors they succeed. Wisdom comes from many counselors. Share your decision with other godly men and women. Their collective response will often provide God's direction in a matter. As Christians, we should strive to make wise and godly decisions about our life. How we make decisions will affect the rest of our life and leave a legacy of faith for others to follow. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For more information about issues covered on Viewpoints, visit pointofview.net. Pointofview.net.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Merrill Matthews, welcome back, and we are talking creation and evolution, and we'll go to Charles now.
Yeah, one of the maybe questions that our listeners might have is, what's the difference between intelligent design theory and creationism or scientific creationism? And I think they are complementary, but they are not the same. Intelligent design theory is the proposition. It's kind of a minimalist theory of origins, and it's the observation that certain features of the natural world are best explained by some kind of a designing intelligence. That's it. There's no effort to identify who the intelligence is, but that there are certain objective features of the natural world, whether you're talking about the macrocosm out in the universe or the microcosm in the smallest element of a cell or even of matter, that those things are best explained as a result of intelligence. And my understanding is that creationism is identifying who that intelligence is, who that designing intelligence is. And many times there's a conscious effort to simply appeal to evidence from the Bible and say, this helps us understand more about what intelligent design actually identifies. Yeah. The Bible even, one more point, buddy, the Bible actually makes an argument from intelligent design when it observes that the heavens declare the glory of God, or God's invisible attributes, his eternal power, divine nature, are clearly seen, understood through what has been made, Romans 1, those are arguments for a designer. And yet creationism fills that out and really incorporates the rest of the evidence from the revealed Word of God.
I've heard critics say that those who are coming forward with an intelligent design argument is really a stealth argument. You're really a creationist, and you're trying to slip God in here. You're just not being completely honest with that argument.
Yeah, I would say that's a dishonest critique, because when you read the literature from the ID proponents, the intelligent design argument, they are not making a religious argument. They're not appealing to holy scriptures or holy books or sources. They're literally looking at certain features of the natural world and saying, listen, an objective understanding of this understands that this could not have been explained by some sort of a blind, purposeless, directionless process like natural selection.
And Denton Bible Church is going to do a seminar on this, I think, in January, aren't you?
That's right. In January, towards the end of January, we're going to have a Science and Faith conference where many of the leading lights in the intelligent design movement will be there, really presenting some of the best evidences on this question of intelligent design.
1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to call and talk to one of our guests, ask a question, give a comment. 1-800-351-1212. We had a caller who just raised the issue and wanted us to address it. We were talking about fossils and the DNA that's available in those that we're looking at, and he or she, I don't know which one was, raised the question of are there human fossils that we have that kind of information from, that we are able to pull some DNA from?
Absolutely, and in the news we constantly hear about Neanderthal DNA. So Neanderthals are an archaic group of humans, and they're able to actually extract DNA from these bones, and these bones range in age from, now I'm using evolutionary ages here, I don't believe these, but 40,000 years to I guess in some cases over 200,000 years old. And they're sequencing DNA from these bones, and it's entirely human. And so they now call these fossils archaic humans. That's a common term that's being used now. One thing that's really interesting, and I illustrate this in talks that I give, I show pictures of modern humans with so-called Neanderthal traits. So we can still find humans with sloping foreheads and large eyebrow ridges and all these things that make Neanderthals supposedly Neanderthals, and they're still present among living humans. And I show all kinds of pictures of people that are alive and well, and some very famous actually, who have these traits. So Neanderthals were just humans.
So we have those. Do we have any others, or is that the primary source that we have?
Well, there's another group of archaic humans. They call them Denisovans. They found those in two different regions in Siberia, and I think the other place was a cave on the Tibetan plateau. And they found that their DNA is basically 100% human as well, and that a lot of people in Asia and even Southeast Asian islands have a lot of the same genes, which makes sense because that's the region of the world where they found these bones.
And so the general point is that many of the things that some scientists, anthropologists, and so forth are saying were some kind of missing link, a link between, say, chimpanzees or and humans, were actually just humans, just a little bit different than us.
Exactly. In fact, when we look at the fossil record of supposed ape men or hominids, we find apes, which are represented by the Australopithecines, and then we find humans, which are represented by Homo erectus or Neanderthals. And so that's all we find, nothing in between. And in fact, I give seminars on this, and I even give quotes by evolutionists who openly acknowledge there's no transitional form between humans and apes. And so that's all we have, humans and apes in the fossil record. And our DNA that we have today from humans and apes shows they're widely different. There's a huge chasm between the two. There's no links.
Let's go to Scott in South Carolina, who has a good question. It's a good time to bring this up. Scott, you're on the air.
Well, thank you for taking my question. I wanted to say, first of all, that this topic has been always before me, it seems, and I've just quite honestly dabbled, not really seriously studied the matter. I've listened to Answers in Genesis and read some of their material, but admittedly not delved into it in great length. But the problem I have then, when I talk to friends or family, is that the discussion quickly goes to, they'll say to me, show me the evidence, show me your resources. And I really haven't collected those types of resources. So I was wondering, is there a place I can go, like a beginner's guide or a creation science for dummies that would maybe bullet point some of these topics that like the soft tissue and bones, et cetera, and give me links or availability to resources that I could study and bring up in conversation?
Scott, we were hoping you would ask.
Yeah, we have a website. It's very simple, icr.org. And we have a search engine there, a search box, and you can put in keywords to any topic you want and pull up lots of free resources. And the majority of those are written at a level that most people can understand. They're for lay-level people in churches and non-believers. And so I would start there. We also have a bookstore on our website with lots of books on different topics and subjects as well. Some are introductory and some are more technical. So we have lots of resources available.
And if I could add to that, Creation Basics and Beyond might be the book for you to start with. Mm. And if you subscribe to Acts and Facts, you'll get our processed through creation eyes perspective on these issues. And then if you have friends who say, what are your sources? A lot of times they're not asking for your source. They're asking for really, if you're getting this from creationist wackos, then we'll be able to laugh at you. So they're just looking for an excuse to laugh. And so you don't want to give that to them. So don't hand them a copy of Acts and Facts because they're not ready for that. Okay. Instead, look at the references at the bottom of each of our articles. Pull up just that reference because each of our articles, most of them, reference a secular technical publication. Because what we do is we look at what the secular colleagues of ours are discovering, how it confirms creation inadvertently to them. And then we just say, look, they just confirmed creation and they didn't even know it. And so all you have to do is pull out that resource and use it.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Scott. Good question. And we're about up to a break, so we'll be coming back to Steve in Maine. But let me reemphasize what you're saying. Go to ICR.org and look on the material. Sign up for Acts and Facts. It's a free publication. It'll be out there. It is written in some of it's fairly technical, some of it's easily understandable for the layperson. So it's a very good source for you to get just a regular input on a number of issues having to deal with this. So I'd encourage you to go to ICR.org and look over that material. As Dr. Tomkins said, sign up for Acts and Facts. 1-800-351-1212, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, we'll go to Steve. Stay with us.
We live in a digital generation. Point of View is reaching this often overly plugged-in generation with truth. You can keep up with us 24 hours a day using your phone, your tablet, your laptop, or your desktop. Search for the Point of View radio talk show on Facebook, where you can keep up with today's issues, learn about current and upcoming guests by liking us on Facebook. Also, follow us on Twitter. Our handle is @Point of View RTS. That stands for Point of View Radio Talk Show. Learn, interact, make a difference with Point of View using new media. And here's one way you can make a big difference. Help us increase our reach by spreading the word among your friends. Share a Facebook post. Tag us in a tweet. With enough joining us to plant seeds, we'll see a tremendous harvest. Come on, it only takes a minute. Search for Point of View Radio Talk Show on Facebook, @Point of View RTS on Twitter, and subscribe to the Point of View Radio Talk Show channel on YouTube. Learn, interact, share. The Point of View radio talk show. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, your guest host for Point of View.
Welcome back, Merrill Matthews, and our guest in studio, Dr. Jeff Tomkins and Dr. Brian Thomas, both of the Institute for Creation Research, and Charles Stolfus, one of the executive pastors at Denton Bible Church. And we've got a question from Steve in Maine. So, Steve, you are on the air.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, this subject fascinates me. Ever since I started reading the book, Signature in the Cell, I've been fascinated with this topic. But we were just talking about DNA, and I know that it wasn't directly from you as a source, but DNA that people had, say, quoted and said from Neanderthal, and you gave that they gave a date of like 40,000 years, which you didn't agree with or may or may not agree with. My question is how long does DNA remain readable before it deteriorates to a point where it's not usable?
Yeah, good question, Steve.
Well, I'll let Brian follow up on this. I'll just make a few comments because Brian's an expert in the decay rates of biomolecules. But, there basically shouldn't be any DNA there to begin with. If it's 40 to 200,000 years old or more, it shouldn't even be there. But the DNA they do extract is highly degraded. It's very difficult to produce good DNA sequence from this material. There's a huge problem with contamination. There's all sorts of microorganisms whose DNA is in these samples, and then you've got human DNA that gets in these modern human from lab workers. In fact, I've got kind of a funny story. I was working with Neanderthal DNA sequence that was given to me. I was given access to it by a postdoctoral scientist at the Max Planck Institute in Germany. And she knew I was a creationist, but she gave me early access to a Neanderthal genome. And I figured, well, I'll work with these smaller chromosomes first, the Y chromosome and chromosome number 22. And I'm doing comparisons of this DNA with modern humans. And then I get a note from this lady after a week or two, and she said, well, we don't think it's a male anymore. We think it's a woman. In other words, there shouldn't be a Y chromosome in this genome. Well, the Y chromosome came from one of the lab workers. So it is very, and because it's completely human DNA, it's easy to get modern human DNA mixed up in it. We've got DNA on our fingers and we breathe it out and sneeze and cough, and DNA gets everywhere. So anyways, so it is a very difficult prospect to get DNA from these samples. It's highly degraded. It's highly contaminated. So it is problematic. But in my opinion, the DNA really should not be there if these samples are as old as these people claim. And I'll let Brian follow up on this.
Sure. And unfortunately, I can't say a hard number because the decay rate of DNA is very temperature dependent. So the warmer it is, the longer that fossil has been sitting in heat, the faster its DNA will degrade. But what we can do is we can have reasonable guesses. That's the best we can do. So the older a fossil is claimed to be, the less likely it is to have the DNA that is sometimes recovered from it. Assuming certain temperatures. So if you're pulling out DNA from a permafrost mammoth, but it's permafrost. I mean, it's been cold for a long time. You would expect DNA to last several times longer in that type of a sample, but not millions. I mean, even if you put it in liquid nitrogen, it's still, which we do in the lab, right, Jeff? We that's how we preserve DNA, is in liquid nitrogen, and it still degrades in liquid nitrogen in the lab, so it's not going to last a million years. So the older it is, the more difficult it is to get the DNA to last.
Thank you, Steve. And let's go to Orban in Texas. Orban, you're on the air.
Well, thank you, sir. I have a quick question. I was given an article on Search for Truth, paleontology, about chemical analysis for dating dinosaur bones. And it mentioned the man's name, Bruce Malone, for further information. I'd like to know if you're familiar with this man by the name of Bruce Malone. And I'd like to know also, it mentions that he proposes that dinosaurs were actually on the Ark of Noah. Do you believe that? Over.
Dr. Thomas?
Yeah, sure. I've met Bruce Malone a few times. I think he takes most of his creation talking points basically from creation ministries like ours, the Institute for Creation Research. We do believe that dinosaurs were probably on the ark because the scripture says that 2 of every kind of creature went on board the ark. And then it says in Genesis chapter 7 that any creature that walked on land and had the breath of life in its nostrils came off the ark. Dinosaurs had nostrils and legs, so that puts them on the ark. How many would there have been? How much space would they have taken up? Well, there's only about 70 basic kinds of dinosaurs. There's a few hundred species, but many of those species belong to the same basic kind. And that would have taken up, well, the sauropods were the biggest. So those got, 100 feet long, and that's not practical to fit on board an ark. But they all came from eggs that were the size of a football or smaller. So they all started small, no matter what kind of dinosaur it was. So if you have juvenile or young sauropods on the ark, and then whatever age of the other dinosaurs, that would have taken up one corner of one of the 3 decks of Noah's Ark. We think they were on the ark, and if you come to our Discovery Center, you'll see you'll walk through the ark and see some of those in our cages.
You have a room in there that looks like an ark, and you have that, and then you have a miniature ark. That's I think built to scale that you show a couple of dinosaurs on there because it's sort of cut in half.
That's right, and we want people to see this really was feasible. You could fit all the animals and all the food and water that they needed, and with room left over.
And the key point here, though, is humans and dinosaurs coexisted at the same time. That has been a question, and evolution has said for years, dinosaurs died out millions of years before humans came around, but we're going to argue that's not the case, right, Charles?
That's right. I think if you take a straightforward reading of the Bible, that is the implication that prior to the judgment that came following the sin of Adam and Eve, there was a harmony in nature that was lost with the curse that was placed on the natural realm. And so prior to that curse being placed, there was a harmony where humans and dinosaurs could have gotten along quite well. And in fact, it's interesting. I talked earlier in our time here about Genesis and Revelation being the bookends of the Bible. That paradise that once prevailed on the earth will one day return, where the curse will be lifted from the creation as described in the book of Revelation. And now, as many books of the Bible argue, that the child will lie down, that will play with the snake and not have any fear, or the lion will lie down with the lamb. In other words, that curse will be lifted such that now we will have the harmony that once prevailed in the book of Genesis prior to the curse.
So when we come back, we're going to go to Kathy in California, and we've got another couple of calls there. But let me reiterate that you should go to pointofview.net. You'll see a link to ICR, to the Institute for Creation Research. You'll be able to find information there. You'll be able to find their books there and their publications. You will also be able to sign up for Acts and Facts and be able to get your copy of Acts and Facts coming in every month. So I would encourage you to do that. And then we'll take up some of these other questions in a minute. It has been there are so many things going on here, Charles, that are just so counter to what people hear on daily, just in the daily talking and discussion about the earth and the age of the earth and dinosaurs and other things. It is amazing how different we get, what a different message we get when we start going to the Bible and we look at some of the science that Dr. Tomkins, Dr. Thomas, and many of the other people at ICR are pulling up.
That's right. And I would argue we are at one of the most exciting times in all of human history where the evidences continue to mount up that confirm the historical groundedness of the Bible. That it's not simply some creation myth unrooted in history or science or reality, but it really is confirmable by the physical evidences. And say, the more we learn about nature, the more it really does, in fact, confirm the Genesis account.
1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to ask a question, 1-800-351-1212. When we come back, we'll go to some of your calls and we'll address some of these issues that we're facing right now. So stay with us. We'll be back in just a few minutes.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we're back with our final segment on Point of View with Dr. Jeff Tomkins and Dr. Brian Thomas of the Institute for Creation Research and Charles Stolfus with Denton Bible Church. And we'll go now to Brian in South Carolina. Brian, you're on the air.
Oh, thank you for taking my call. This is going to take about 2.5 minutes to explain, so
give us the abbreviated version.
That's as abbreviated as I can make it. You mentioned the need for millions of years, actually billions of years, 16.8 billions, for both evolution, yes.
Well, yes, but you wanted to talk about the red shifting of stars, right?
Right. Explain the explanation for the increasing redshift that has been observed in the last 60 years. The evolution of the biological genome and the extreme distance of stars beyond our galaxy, upon which evolution has postulated a universe expanding to billions of years. But the observed expanding universe is based upon the Doppler effect from the 1850s. Those near railroad tracks hear the pitch of the train horn shift from higher to lower when it passes the observer. Astronomers publicly say the Doppler effect causes the redshift in the spectra of stars' visible light. The amount of the redshift determining the frequency and the recessional velocity. The time required for light. I'm sorry. It's complex. I can't make it simple.
But we have the general idea.
Yeah, I think what the caller is asking about is that if the conclusions from modern science are true, namely that some of these stars are on the order of 13 or more billion light years away, which is a long time, and we're actually seeing these points of light, isn't that evidence that the Earth is and the universe is far older than what we are arguing in a recent Earth or a recent creationist account? In other words, we're saying that the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old. This evidence supposedly is arguing that it's on the order of billions of years old. How do you harmonize both of them?
And it's a good question because you see that red shifting going on, and astronomers get confused. I don't say confused, but they don't know what to do with some of this because in some cases they think it's expanding faster, or they shouldn't be expanding this fast.
Well, this is, of course, not my area of expertise. I'm a fossil guy. But from what I've heard from my colleagues at the Institute, when we talk about stars, we want to raise a couple of questions first. And we sort of want to steer the conversation by pointing out the horizon problem and blue stars. So before we as biblical creationists put up a defensive posture, let's just propose a counter question or two. Number one, the horizon problem, which observes the smooth and even temperature of all of outer space at very low temperature, 2.7 Kelvin. How do you get it that smooth? Well, the only way to do that we know is to have starlight bathe every corner of the universe. But in order to do that, you have to have more time than the secular age of the universe permits. And so that's a huge starlight and time problem for the standard model that people nickname the Big Bang model. Huge problem. It's just as difficult an issue as any other. And then we have blue stars. And so my next question would be, before we talk about anything anything critical of the biblical perspective, which is that God stretched out the heavens miraculously, how do you explain blue stars, which burn through their fuel much, much faster than the other colors? So fast that they should have gone supernova after only 1 million years, certain class of these blue stars. And yet the universe is studded with these short, young-looking blue stars. You explain those to me first, then we'll talk about me having to defend anything else.
Let me ask another question that I remember when Jurassic Park came out. You had the scientists taking DNA from mosquitoes and creating a whole new living animals. And this relates to what one of the callers was wanted to ask. Can we take DNA in any kind of sense and use that to recreate some type of animal? There are in Israel, they found seeds for some plants that are thousands of years old, and they're trying to grow those seeds into a plant. So the thing say, we've got a plant just like they had, say, in the Bible times. Can we do anything like that with DNA that we know of now?
Well, the problem is that DNA, even in something like a mammoth that's been frozen in permafrost, is still degraded. It's still broken up. And so there has been talk about taking snippets of mammoth DNA, mammoth genes, and then placing those into the modern elephant genome. And so you're not really cloning a mammoth. You're just basically taking fragments of mammoth DNA and putting them in a modern creature, an elephant, that you can express those genes. And so that might be possible, and there's actually people that are trying to work on that. But the problem with DNA is that when a creature dies, then the DNA begins degrading very quickly, and it just begins, fragment. It just ends up in fragments, just tons of little fragments. And of course, as Brian noted, this is affected by temperature and moisture and a lot of those things as well. And so, no, that's not really possible. The Jurassic Park movie was entertaining fiction.
Fiction all the way.
It was enjoyable fiction, though.
Right.
The first one was better than the sequels. One caller has, since we're running out of time, I'll just sort of bring this up. One caller says, "How do you reconcile the creation of Adam with a Earth with a universe that's billions of years old? How do you reconcile those two things?" And I think one of the questions is, how do you know the Earth or the universe is billions of years old? But how do you reconcile a Adam from 5,000 or 6,000 years ago and what appears to be a very old universe?
I think these are the scientists, so I'll let them speak to the scientific issues here. But I think as a creationist, as someone who teaches on this subject, I think we find evidences that undermine the supposed evidence for ancient ages. So the so-called objective ways of attaching age to the universe are suspect. Though radiometric dating methods, or even carbon-14, which is a different kind of dating method, they are suspect for a variety of reasons, and I think they're actually falsifiable in objective ways. And then I would say also there are some positive evidences for a recent creation. And so could God have created a universe that's completely mature and functioning and integrated and really harmonious as it hangs together as a place in which to set Adam himself? And so I would say Adam and Eve are placed in a mature garden even. And so if you'd have walked into the garden and cut down one of the trees, you may in fact have been able to count up tree rings, because that's the way trees function. They have those rings. And so I think it's explainable by the fact that God would create a creation that is fully mature and functioning, a setting in which Adam and Eve could flourish.
And we can end on the note that the Discovery Center actually has a garden that you've created there, a Garden of Eden, and it is fully formed. So there you go. Listen, I want to thank my guests today, Dr. Tomkins and Dr. Thomas, for joining us from the Recreation Research Institute. And it is we encourage you to go to their website, ICR, I can't get it out, .org, for the information there. Or you can go to pointofview.net, and we have the links to that. And we have bios up there for them. And to Charles Stolfus from Denton Bible Church, thank you for joining us. Fascinating discussion on an issue that is timely and is much misunderstood, I would say. So thank you for joining us on for the program today, and Point of View will be back tomorrow.
There's an old saying that the first casualty in war is truth. Maybe that helps you understand what's happening in America right now. Thankfully, it's not a war with bullets, but there is a war for control. Control of the country and control of your pocketbook. Truth is under fire, but you can help turn the tide by supporting truth. Join the Truth Team at Point of View Radio. Learn how you can make a difference at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Don't let truth become a casualty on your watch. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151.
So, what would you do with an extra $500 a month in your budget? Pay off loans, save it, do something fun? Well, it's something you may need to think about if you become a member of MediShare. MediShare is a Christian healthcare sharing ministry, and it works. You can save big time on your healthcare costs, and you don't have to pay for things you don't believe in either. Find out more. Call 855-SHARE-40. That's 855-SHARE-40. 855-SHARE-40.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.